Hey guys, this is Chloe and this is Michelle. We just found a DVD of what says an initial real-life situation. Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions here, but I think that this real-life situation might take us to TOK world. Now, before we start this journey, let's see what this initial real-life situation is all about. Contact is a 1997 American film that follows scientist Dr. Eleanor Arroway, also known as Ellie, on her search to discover extraterrestrial life. At the climax of the movie, Ellie travels to space and meets with the aliens she's spent her life trying to find. But when she returns to Earth, Ellie discovers that she has no proof of her encounter with the aliens, as shown in the following clip.
Wait a minute, let me get this straight. You admit that you have absolutely no physical evidence to back up your story.
Yes.
You admit that you very well may have hallucinated this whole thing.
Yes.
You admit that if you were in our position, you would respond with exactly the same degree of incredulity and skepticism.
Yes.
Then why don't you simply withdraw your testimony and concede that this journey to the center of the galaxy, in fact, never took place?
Because I can't. I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything that I know as a human being, everything that I am tells me that it was real.
Okay, we have our real life situations. Next, we need to come up with questions that relate to our real life situation. For this situation, we asked, do aliens exist? Does Ellie need proof of her visit in order for her claim to be scientific? With her lack of physical evidence, how is Dr. Eleanor going to help make scientific advancements? Should the world believe Ellie's claims? Is it justifiable that Ellie's upset that no one believes her? These extractions bring us to our knowledge issue, which is, to what extent does science lead us to the truth?
When developing our knowledge issue, we asked, to what extent can science be considered both objective and truthful? Quantitative and qualitative research are the main methods used when gathering information in science. Quantitative research is research using mathematical or statistical information. One example of this is measurement. Qualitative research investigates the why of a situation as opposed to the what. Quantitative research attempts to prevent bias with reliance on numbers, while qualitative research seeks to explain underlying reasons of why something is happening, even if the research includes bias. With these two methods of research, science cannot be completely both objective and truthful. If someone relies on quantitative research completely, then it may not be considered completely true, as it does not provide the complete picture. But by including qualitative research in addition to quantitative research, there is a risk of bias. In Contact, Ellie's research had a lack of quantitative proof, which her peers found critical to her discovery. Her peers only believed her when they found 18 hours of static footage, matching with her claim that she traveled into deep space for 18 hours. The scientific community only supported her claim when she had quantitative evidence. This supports the idea that to some extent, science can be both objective and truthful. But in order for science to be truthful, there needs to be objective evidence. The next question in our knowledge issue development is, does doubt help or hurt scientific discovery? Scientific skepticism is the practice of questioning whether claims are supported by empirical research and have reproducibility. Scientific skepticism is a normal method in the science community as it pursues the extension of certified knowledge. On the same token, skepticism may hinder scientific advancement, as shown in Contact. Ellie is sure of what she experienced on her journey through space, but the rest of the scientific community is not sure because of doubt. While doubt prevents any random scientific claim from being perceived as fact, scientific skepticism also prevents the scientific community from believing things that cannot be reproduced. The final question we asked to develop our knowledge issue is, how is scientific discovery validated? Scientific discovery is validated through the use of what is called a scientific method. In this approach, a hypothesis must be made. A hypothesis is a reasonable guess based on what is known or observed. In contact, the hypothesis is that aliens exist. If the hypothesis matches the result of the experiment, the hypothesis becomes a theory. A scientific theory consists of one or more hypotheses that have been supported with repeated testing. Laws are often used to explain the way things act, and unlike theories and hypotheses, they are usually not proven wrong, as they are the fundamental laws of science. An example of a law is Newton's laws of motion. As shown through these vocabulary words, there is no vocabulary word for an absolute truth, as it doesn't exist in science. The closest scientific discovery gets to the truth is through facts. With these facts, we can support or invalidate a claim, but no matter how many facts support a claim, nothing can totally be proven.
Based off of these questions, one knowledge question comes to mind. How do we validate our perceptions? Chloe, I think I see a real-life situation over there. Look!
The U.S. war on drugs dates back to 1971, when President Nixon declared a war on drugs. This war on drugs was perceived by many to be a good thing, but as the war on drugs waged on, it was seen in a different light. The House I Live In is a 2012 documentary made by Eugene Jarecki that takes a holistic view of the U.S. drug war. One of the most controversial issues discussed in the documentary is the connection between race and the war on drugs. Richard Miller validates his perception that the U.S. war on drugs is unethical by looking at history.
Historically, anti-drug laws have always been associated with race. In the 1800s, certain kinds of drugs that are illicit today were common in this country. Cocaine was widely used, heroin. People using drugs was something that was just ordinarily accepted. Opium, for example, was used by middle-aged, successful whites, often housewives in the South. If people were addicted or abusing drugs, they were viewed sympathetically as people who had to be helped. It was seen as a public health issue rather than a crime issue. Well, one of the first changes was on the West Coast, when smoking opium was made a criminal offense. Now, why would opium smoking be illegal in California but not in Mississippi? What was going on in California that was a concern about smoking opium? Well, as it turns out, it had nothing to do with opium itself. The concern was with the people associated with smoking opium, and that was the Chinese, who had come to this country, and many of whom were in California, working hard, working for very little pay, and becoming part of the American success story. But their success was taking jobs away from white workers. So politicians got together and decided they got to find something about the Chinese for which they can be criminalized to get them out of the way. Now, of course, you can't throw people in jail simply because they're Chinese, but you can throw them in jail because they smoke opium. In the same way, we saw things going on with cocaine. Again, it was middle-aged, successful people in this country, business executives, physicians, housewives, all perfectly legal. But then around the turn of the century, cocaine began being associated with blacks. They could withstand police bullets, it was thought. They can work hard all day, all night long, and all day long again, threatening the jobs of white workers. And so laws began to be passed against cocaine. You're not arresting these people officially because they're black. You're arresting them because they've committed some sort of drug violation. These laws set up a very dangerous precedent of racial control.
Racism is something most people equate to as being immoral. With this clip, historian Richard Miller validates his perception of the U.S. drug war by presenting the audience with a paradox. It is a preconceived notion that American laws are fair and just, but by showing that they have their roots in racism makes the audience question whether the accepted ethics of the war on drugs is justified, or if Richard Miller is making a valid point. Although Richard Miller himself perceives the U.S. drug war as being unethical, Larry Curley sees the nature of the drug war differently, as he is a marshal.
For the last 29 years in working in law enforcement, the major thing that's changed is the drug trafficking.
What are you looking for, the drug guys?
Anything, everything.
At first glance, Marshall Curley seemed from a bygone era of law enforcement.
I guess I'm going to portray myself as that kind of person. A man with a white hat, riding gold silver.
But as enforcing drug laws has become the primary focus for police across the country, the nature of his work as a small-town marshal has changed as well.
You got that? Two Hispanic males in a car, dark tinted windows. We want it on that side of the road. Yeah. Okay. What are you going to tell her? She knows you're going to jail. You can go ahead and put him in the car. It's supposed to be illegal to profile.
Right.
But you kind of, after working so long, you kind of know who's doing something.
So is it sort of phony when people say they don't profile? Is it
That's all phony. It's all phony. If you don't profile vehicles, you're not in law enforcement. That's the way it is, man. You know? Come on.
Okay, now what about profiling people?
Profiling people, same thing.
In this clip, Larry Curley uses cultural knowledge systems to validate a perception that is seemingly the polar opposite of the opinion stated earlier. He uses his cultural knowledge systems to assist him in validating his perception that discrimination in the war on drugs is not wrong, but necessary. From the environment he's lived in, he has been around drug use. His perception is that the reality of a marshal entails discrimination. In both of these perceptions, they see the war on drugs as harmful to the community, but in different ways. Richard Miller is a historian, so his perspective is more objective, as what he knows from the U.S. drug war is purely from fact. He sees that the U.S. war on drugs is ineffective and has systematically oppressed classes of people. Larry Curley uses his experience to validate his perception that the war on drugs is a problem that needs to be strict, but does not see it as racist. While Richard Miller perceives that the drug war is not working because drug laws have been based on discriminatory ideals, Larry Curley feels that the war on drugs is effective because of that same discrimination.
Oh my gosh! Michelle! I think I found another real-life situation!
The Green Revolution was an agricultural movement that took place in the 1930s all the way up to the 80s. The purpose of the revolution was to increase the production of agricultural crops throughout developing countries such as India. Now, many praise the Green Revolution as it helped improve the conditions in developing countries by giving them the necessary grains for starving populations. However, there are differing perspectives that did not agree that the revolution helped developing countries. The perspective taken on the Green Revolution just depended on the information that was focused on.
More than half the farmers of the world live in a subsistence agriculture outside of the economies of their own country. They have had very little or no money with which to make purchases of the many items that you need for a decent life.
Now we're going to take a look at the different perspectives of the Green Revolution in India and how they were validated. One perspective is that the Green Revolution was successful based on the economic status of India after the revolution. A study conducted by Koichi Fujita, professor of Southeast Asia Studies at the University of Kyoto, showed the growth rate in the agricultural sector in India's economy. He discussed how the additional production of rice helped raise rural income, alleviate poverty among farmers, and prepared India's market for global trading based on statistical data collected after the revolution. In this case, math was used to validate the perception held by Professor Fujita. Statistically speaking, economic growth is perceived as an indication of improvement. So when the economy of India before the revolution is compared to the economy of India after the revolution, the statistics provided tangible evidence to support that the Green Revolution was working. To a professor conducting research about the effectiveness of the Green Revolution in developing countries, the data provided a compelling argument. However, mathematical evidence is not always the way someone will choose to look at the Green Revolution with. Vandana Shiva, an environmental activist, chose to look at how the Green Revolution negatively affected Indian society through her cultural knowledge system.
The saddest thing with the Green Revolution is that for the first time in history, whether you take Africa, Latin America, or Asia, the people who are starving are the food producers. That never happened before. If you were an agriculturist, you were fed. If you were in the town, maybe there was famine. Green Revolution has reversed that equation between the country and the town because it has turned agriculture from being a producing sector into being a consuming sector. Guzzling chemicals, eating up oil either as energy or in the form of fertilizers, and basically totally dependent on inputs that come from industry and urban areas, and probably outside the country, imported inputs. So what we basically have is a situation in which the food producers starve, and the ones who've never worked at producing food have food abundance. That reversal to me is perverse, totally perverse.
In this interview, she discusses how the Green Revolution has created a situation in which the producers of the crops are starving and the crop sellers have food in abundance. The role of the producer can no longer sufficiently provide for themselves despite being the ones cultivating the crops. She also discusses how grains such as wheat and rice used in the Green Revolution do not provide the nutrients for the vegetarian population of India. The population needed more of oilseeds and cereal crops such as bran in order to have a nutritionally balanced diet. Her argument focuses on the shift in societal roles and sees the negative consequences in the long run, rather than the positive consequences in the present. The different ways of validating perception can be seen in this real-life situation. Koichi Fujita is more likely going to use a more objective area of knowledge, as he is not from India. Vandana Shiva is from India and is more likely to grasp the immeasurable impact of the Green Revolution. Because of this, Vandana is more apt to use a more subjective area of knowledge. Though neither of their perceptions is determined as the right one, how they validate their perceptions is dependent on how connected they are to the subject. Chloe, I didn't think it was possible. But I think I found another real-life situation. The Guernica is a complex art piece that can be seen in different perspectives. From a historical perspective, a person may choose to look for the political statement within the piece. At the time Picasso created this, the Spanish Civil War was taking place. The Civil War revolved around the conflict between nationalists led by General Francisco Franco and the Republican government led by Manuel Azaña. The Civil War was a bloody and violent war that ended with General Francisco Franco as Spain's dictator. During his dictatorship, he ran an oppressive government. Any opposition was dealt with ruthlessly and censorship was implemented. Guernica can be seen as a statement against Franco's rule of terror. It depicts the horrific and chaotic effects that war and Franco had on the lives of civilians. So the painting provides a perspective that can be understood in the context of when it was created, a time period of war that affected the entire world.
When I first saw Guernica, I used reason to support my perception. The complexity of the art piece made me question the motive behind the art. For someone who didn't understand the implications or the history behind the piece, Guernica seemed like a random assortment of figures. It seemed like it had been put together in pandemonium. The only thing I could pick out was sadness from the facial expressions and the color symbolism of black and white. Aside from that, I didn't understand the deeper meaning of the painting, and I only understood what I had concluded from reasoning. I validated my perception using reasoning because I did not have the knowledge or the background needed to understand the other perspective, the deeper perspective of the piece.
Michelle, I don't know about you, but I'm super tired.
Me too.
I think it's time we come to our conclusion.
Throughout our presentation, we analyzed how we can validate our perceptions in different ways. Our real-life situation supported the idea that when we validate our perceptions to ourselves, we tend to use factors that are less tangible or up for debate. For example, in our Guernica painting, I validated my perception based on what I saw and my reasoning. However, when we want to validate our perceptions to others, we tend to use more of what is considered hard factors, such as mathematics and science. Though a lot of factors weigh in when considering how one validates their perception, a person's background is shown to be the most dominant factor. In the house I live in, the historian validated his perception, unsurprisingly using the historical area of knowledge. In the Green Revolution, Vandana Shiva unsurprisingly uses her cultural knowledge systems to validate her claims, as she is from India. In the movie Contact, Ellie's background is of science, and more importantly, hard evidence. The main theme in the movie is the conflict between faith and science. The fact that Ellie cannot prove her experience with extraterrestrials is a point made that sometimes your perceptions cannot be validated in a way you're used to. Sometimes you have to make a leap of faith.